Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Gill. I am the Executive Director for AIA Orange County. You are attending today's first program in the new California Design Series, How We House, brought to us by the California Council of Architectural Component Executives. Next slide. So, like I mentioned, this is the first in a series for 2021. Every Wednesday, the first Wednesday of the month for the next 3 months, you will hear from yet another chapter on what is going on in their areas. Coming up is How We House Redwood Empire, followed by Central Valley, and facing with Long Beach, South Bay. Next slide. So we have a really great feature here today. It's the Q&A button. Please, we're gonna look to the questions throughout this entire program. We want it to be very interactive. So at any time, put a question in there. And by the way, if you don't want to type a question, but you want to check what's there, go into the Q&A. And if you see something like, wow, that's fantastic, just press a thumbs up and all of those will move to the top because we know that those are the ones that you really want to learn the most about. Next slide. So, as required by National AIA, I am required to go ahead and read off these 4 learning objectives so we can earn 1 HSW for attending today's program. Attendees will learn and examine the strategies in creating healthy and sustainable design and market-driven attainable housing. Attendees will learn about new design concepts and wellness benefits in urban villages. Sorry, I had to move the photos of everybody over. I couldn't read the last 2. Third, attendees will understand the health benefits of living large and compact spaces through innovative design techniques. And 4, attendees will learn about cost-effective design solutions that create adaptable living environments through the use of passive energy systems, open space, and new technology. Next slide. So before we move into Orange County, let's learn about California, the state of the state, How We House California, perspective on the housing crisis in our state. Hillary, please go ahead and start the video.
Hi, I'm Amberly Leslie, a legislative advocate at Housing California. Housing California is a nonprofit advocacy organization that leverages our deep relationships with coalitions and practitioners across the state to shape the narrative on affordable housing and homelessness, build and shift power to elevate underrepresented communities, and drive transformative policy change that supports homes, health, and wealth in thriving communities. I'm really grateful to be able to welcome you to the American Institute of Architects How We House event. California has the highest poverty rate in the country when accounting for cost of living. While housing costs are significantly higher in coastal and urban areas, low and stagnating wages in rural inland areas also make it difficult for low-income households to make ends meet. There are 2 million very low and extremely low income Californians who struggle to find housing that is affordable to them. In 2019, nearly 5 in 10 very low income households and 8 in 10 extremely low income households were severely cost burdened, meaning they spend more than half of their incomes on housing costs. We are now witnessing the economic reverberations of these statistics, which have been heightened by the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of our neighbors who enjoyed modest incomes lost their jobs when their workplaces shuttered. Some have slipped into poverty and fear the threat of eviction, while others have fallen into homelessness. California's homeless population increased by nearly 7% early last year to over 160,000. Yet paradoxically, despite record low interest rates that would typically spur residential construction, developers across the country have faced increased costs associated with labor and material shortages. Never before has the scale of our housing affordability crisis been so great. If you are like me, you recognize that the scale of our housing crisis demands that we all pitch in towards solutions. In collaboration with the California Housing Partnership, Housing California has chartered a comprehensive set of policy solutions to end homelessness, meet our state's housing needs, and advance racial equity and economic inclusion in just 10 years. Our Roadmap Home 2030 offers strategies in key 5 areas. First, we need to invest in our values by providing ongoing financial resources to create affordable homes. Second, we need to promote fairness in our tax systems to rectify structural discrimination and generate the revenue needed to meet the scale of California's housing need. Third, we must advocate for public policies that ensure renters have equitable access to housing and are protected from market speculation and systematic discrimination. Fourth, we support policies that create efficiencies and accountability in government. And finally, we need to reimagine growth so that developing affordable homes in all communities is easier and cheaper, especially in areas of opportunity and places where Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and other people of color traditionally have been excluded. You can learn more about all our 57 policy solutions by visiting roadmaphome2030.org. We are grateful to our statewide partners who advocated with us to secure support from the California legislature and Governor Gavin Newsom for unprecedented levels of housing investment. $2 billion will be allocated over the next 2 fiscal years to help local jurisdictions address homelessness. $2.75 billion over the next 2 years have been allocated to augment Home Key, which builds on the success of Project Room Key by providing funding to localities to serve those experiencing homelessness by acquiring and rehabilitating hotels, motels, and vacant apartments. $500 million will go towards California's low-income housing tax credit program. In coming years, we will continue to utilize our Roadmap Home 2030 to advocate that LIHTC expansion be made permanent, as it is a critical and reliable source of funding for affordable housing. Additional state resources have also been allocated to improve homebuyer assistance programs, to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, and prevent eviction and foreclosure. In all, nearly $12 billion have been allocated to end and prevent homelessness and spur affordable housing development in our state. As an industry, these historic affordable housing investments buoy our spirits. Yet we know that durable change takes time. And so that means we must continue our advocacy in partnership for solutions like the ones I just mentioned. We look to you to join our efforts as creative visionaries, as masters of the long game, as jacks of all trades to help us move California towards a vision of housing that is sensitive to a community's history, its culture, its landscape, toward a vision of housing that is as affordable as it is beautiful. I hope you enjoy the program.
Okay, that was excellent. So let's move into how we house Orange County. Before we move into our 2 presenters, I would like to review a few statistics, demographics, and realities about Orange County. So let's go ahead and learn a little bit about the OC. Next slide. So starting with the statistics, Orange County is approximately 25 by 32 square miles. We are very small and we are very dense. With over 3 million registered inhabitants, 34 cities, we're approximately 4,000 inhabitants per square acre. We're surrounded by the ocean, by the mountains, LA and San Diego. We have no room for growth. We have to look at how to build on what we have. It makes land value extremely expensive. We are noted as the 6th most dense county in the US. If we were a US city, we would be the 3rd most populous. And if we were a state, while ranked 31st, we would be half the size of Rhode Island, the smallest state. Next slide. So how about some demographics? The average price of a home, mind you, that's single family, condo, townhomes, and co-ops, is $295,300 in the US. My guess is that's probably more single family US wide. In Orange County, $890,000 is the average price. And we can say it flip-flop. Those are condos and townhouses. In order to own a home, you need to have an income of $167,670. However, the median income for a family in Orange County, $90,234. A big disparity there. What gets even worse is for a single person. The median income is $41,514. In OC, the dollar amount considered as low income, $58,450. We have a huge problem here in affordability and lack of land and how we take care of our housing problem. Next slide. So what are the realities? The regional housing needs allocation for Orange County is we need to find space for 180,000 homes, of which nearly half need to be affordable housing. Now, again, we're looking at expensive land value. How do we get to that point? Which you're going to hear about some excellent ways of doing so during today's program. While California's increased low-income housing by 84%, federal HUD has decreased it by 52%. That is not helping us out. 82% of the 120,000 low-income renter households pay more than half of their income for rental housing. And the most unfortunate is almost 10% of inhabitants in Orange County live in poverty. Next slide. So now let's move into our program. You're going to hear about some excellent examples, how these firms are looking to the future of who we are. We have two presenters today, the first being Ron Nestor, AIA, Principal, WHA, William Hesmahalch Architects, and the second being Daniel Gehman, AIA, Principal at Danielian Associates. So Ron, Dan, it's all yours.
Okay, well, thank you. Let me figure out how to share the screen. I think it's this one. Okay, while that's coming up, I'm Ron Nestor, Senior Principal with WHA. I have more than 40 years experience in community planning and residential design. And it's still coming up, right? There it is. I'm gonna give a little bit of a step back, historic perspective on development patterns in Orange County and how that has driven two distinct solutions. And part of the story also is the story of the creation of the modern home building industry. So let's see, I'm advancing. It didn't advance. Okay, here we go, I think. Okay, it's coming slowly. Orange County is really the story of two cities. There's South Orange County, which is what everybody in the world knows, the sun-splashed beaches, the beautiful people, the expensive cars, and this is the image that Orange County has. But there's another city, the North Orange County, which is a very cosmopolitan and mixed community that includes Beverly Hills quality, historic neighborhoods, but also some of the poorest neighborhoods in the state. A big problem in North Orange County is overcrowding, and you see the little diagram at the bottom that on average in the US, there are 2.5 people per household. Orange County's average is 3.1, and in Santa Ana, in the middle of the county, the average is 4.4 per household. And South Orange County is dominated by the large master plan communities. This is Ladera Ranch in South Orange County. These communities are very beautiful. They include housing of every kind of financial strata, and incorporate parks and open space and schools and businesses, all in a comprehensive village master plan. We were the master architects on this project. Another slide from South County. This is Newport Coast, where you have along the bottom part of the picture, $4 and $5 million tract homes, and in the upper part of the picture, multi-million-dollar estate homes. But at the same scale, I'm going to show you North County. This is the development pattern there, and you can see it's quite different. And as Jeff just explained, over the next 8 years, we're supposed to incorporate another 180,000 units in this county. And many of the cities are considered built out or hemmed in, as Jeff said, by ocean and mountains. So how are we going to add such a large number of housing units? So that is the task that Daniel and I have. One solution is, particularly in North Orange County, is redevelopment. So this is the Main Place Mall on the left side of the screen in North Santa Ana. And you can see on the right side of the screen, they've been tearing down old office parks, old shopping centers, and replacing them with much higher density development of residential units. And this is a recently approved slide from Santa Ana. The Main Place Mall is going to be rehabbed. A lot of the parking lots are going to be cleared for multi-story apartment buildings. So we're going to see that trend in both North and South Orange County. This is one of our projects in the Main Place Mall area to give you a sense of scale of the new development. So a bunch of headlines. In Orange County, the price of homes is constantly on the front page of the paper. The first one here shows that through the Irvine Housing Trust, they collaborated with the Irvine Company who donated land. They provided 68 new townhomes priced at $425,000, and more than 6,000 people joined a lottery for those 68 homes. We're always getting in the paper about how neighborhoods have jumped from into the $1 million plus category. And in the bottom slide, it says that recently 9 zip codes have moved out of the bargain category, which is less than $625,000. And more are moving into the $1 million plus category. And the very bottom, it says that Orange County home prices are escalating at $15 an hour. It's pretty remarkable. Another myth I want to talk about is that Orange County is a suburban place, a suburban sprawl. It's actually, as Jeff mentioned, one of the densest places in America, 6th densest in America, 2nd densest in California, only after San Francisco. And what we see in the development pattern is in order to create affordability, smaller and smaller lots and smaller homes and higher density products. The tide has changed here. The county used to be a stronghold of republicanism, and that's changing. And in Santa Ana, they recently elected a millennial city council of non-white representatives that are forging ahead and looking what Santa Ana and the center of the county will look like when they need to add thousands of more housing units. So I'm encouraged by new thinking. A little bit of historic perspective. The map on the right is exactly 100 years old. And you can see the characteristic. North Orange County was dominated by small farms and that square grid pattern, small towns set between the farms and the metropolitan center of Santa Ana. And then there's that big diagonal. Everything south of it was the remnants of the old Spanish ranchos, which had assimilated into the Irvine Ranch and Rancho Mission Viejo to the very south, and Rancho Mission Viejo extended into San Diego. But this clearly shows the north and south divide of the county. I know people that, older people that remember Orange County looking like that upper left picture, dominated by orange groves and other farms and pasture land for cattle grazing. People remember when Jamboree Road was a 2-lane road instead of a 10-lane as it is today. After World War II, there was a tremendous explosion of growth in the South Los Angeles area, in the mid-cities, in Long Beach and Lakewood, and the developers were looking for all those nice little squares in North Orange County to start filling up. And then in 1955, Walt Disney decided to build a park on some of those orange groves, and the state planned Interstate 5, called the Santa Ana Freeway, to run past Disneyland, and that really opened up all those little square farms for development. Anaheim grew at just an explosive rate between 1955 and 1963 when all those farms filled in. And knowing that development was marching forward at such a rapid pace, they came to that big diagonal, which was the Irvine Ranch. The Irvine Ranch composed about 1/5 of the territory of Orange County. And the Irvine family decided that their land was more valuable if they could hold it together and create a better system of development than what had been existing in North Orange County. They called a young architect from San Francisco named Ray Watson, who's pictured here on the extreme right, and asked him to come down and interview to see if he would like to be the planning manager of this new concept that they were developing, and come down to Irvine. And his answer was, "Where's Irvine?" So he came down, he established the master plan. He invited William Pereira to collaborate on the University of California at Irvine and come up with the first of villages. But one of the most important things that Ray Watson did was that he said that because this land was so prime and all the builders wanted to be here, he made a rule that absolutely nothing on the ranch could be built without being designed by a licensed architect. And that really changed everything. And it created the modern home building industry. And you can see this article from Architect Magazine in 2004. It said that Orange County architects are the masters of the suburbs, constantly honing and improving what Americans call home. My first job was with Barry Burkus, and this is an article from the same, this is a clip from the same article from Barry Burkus. He says, with open land and no architectural heritage to consider, the Irvine Ranch was kind of a blank slate that every architect dreams of. He goes on to say, Orange County was not inhibited by tradition. It was a new place. We invented things here that have become common across the country, like volume houses, zero lot line homes, kitchens and families at the back of the house. Orange County was an incubator for those ideas. And in reality, these ideas now have spread across the country and indeed around the globe as Orange County architects are in demand for creating new housing solutions. So on the Irvine Ranch, this is one of the villages. I think it's a real landmark project. It's the village of Woodbridge in Irvine. The village of Woodbridge is really a city within a city. It was started in 1975. It's a little more than 2.5 square miles, has a population of 20,000, and is a self-contained community that includes recreation, all manner of housing, schools, jobs, shopping, churches, and so forth, medical facilities. And it has become kind of a model that is being replicated around the world, as I've mentioned. Another phenomenon that we've had in Orange County is the closure of 2 military bases. This is the El Toro Marine Base in the southern part of the county that is now being transformed into the Great Park and the Great Park communities by 5 Point development. You can see the northern part of the slide there, all these new villages, and we've been involved in many of those. At the south part of the slide, you see the beginnings of Great Park, which when built out is supposed to rival Balboa Park in San Diego with recreational amenities and cultural facilities. And so the new communities in South Orange County look much like this, focus on common open space. As the houses get smaller and smaller and the lots get smaller and smaller, you see minimal front yards. You see now the introduction of 3-story single-family homes, and 3-story is becoming quite common. This is Novel Park, also in the Great Park communities. It's a very nice community of all 3-story buildings. You have 3-story townhomes, 3-story stacked flats, and 3-story single-family homes hubbed around this outdoor space. And the outdoor space includes a community center that has a coffee shop, and it's a great place for everybody to gather, especially considering the homes are getting smaller and smaller. So it's your third place. And as I said, the open space is critical in the design of these new communities. And it's where everybody can collect and gather. At the Great Park in particular, there were a number of very large historic trees as part of the old Marine base, and all those trees were saved and they've been repopulated in the new communities to give an instant sense of history and size. In Irvine, we also have the phenomenon of redevelopment. In Irvine, they created the originally called Irvine Industrial Complex, later renamed Irvine Business Center, and it was a state-of-the-art industrial park where large buildings designed by architects were surrounded by pretty lush landscaping. Over the time now, these properties have become so valuable, some at more than $10 million an acre, that they're being redeveloped, as you can see here. So the 1-story tilt-up buildings are being replaced by 4- and 5-story wrap apartment buildings on that big industrial building at the bottom. Part of that parking lot has become a major shopping center, and another building has been repurposed into a large church at the bottom of the screen. So this is the scale of development in the center of Orange County on these redevelopment parcels. And this is the kind of thing that you're seeing in North County very prominently, and also in South Orange County. Even one of these are from Daniel that was built in Laguna Niguel. The other large land bank was the El Toro Marine Air Station. which is now being transformed into many different villages of homes and shopping and business parks. This this is the Tustin Marine Station. At the Tustin Marine Station, we developed one community called Levity, and you can see the more contemporary aesthetic. And this is another topic that contemporary is becoming very accepted in the marketplace. This project sold well, included 3 different product types, and you can see this open spaces are tight, but people love it because it's like living in a resort. Also because the sites are becoming so small, the rooftop decks on most of the projects are well received. And finally, I'll just talk a moment about the next housing crisis, is that every day about 100,000 baby boomers turn 65. The good news is that life expectancy is still increasing, although with the COVID, I think that slowed down a bit, but they predict that, well, in 2014, there were 8 million people 75 plus. By 2029, that number will grow to 14.4 million, and it's estimated that nearly 60% of these will not be able to afford middle income housing. Another interesting statistic is that UCI, they're studying the 90 plus population. And Dr. Claudia Kawa reports that a child born today has a 50% chance of living to 103 or 104. So we really have to start thinking about how to house our elderly populations. So this is one of my projects at the Great Park neighborhoods in Irvine. It's called Luxera, and it's an affordable senior apartment project with related companies. And you can see that to live here, you have to meet certain economic requirements. But even as an affordable project, you can see the amenities are very nice. This is would be a nice place to live in your senior years. And then another one of our projects in South Orange County that I think is going to be another growing area of attention is the congregate care facilities. This has a combination of independent living, assisted living, and memory care living. And it's just a giant area that as our population is aging, we need to solve this, and how to do it that somebody can actually afford to live here. So those are my slides. I will now turn it over to Daniel. Unless do we want to do questions first? I don't know. Jeff?
At this point, there are no questions. But
okay.
I know everybody was just reminding people to go ahead and type them in there.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
And you need to switch display. There you go, Daniel.
Okay, great. So, hey, Ron, that is a great job. I could just listen to that preparation or that presentation multiple times because they're so very dense in information. I'm going to take a breath and talk a little bit philosophically for a moment and then dive into a granular level of detail that is sort of the opposite end of the higher dense things. But to quote my friend Rochelle Mills, who is fond of saying, in order to solve the housing crisis, we need more of everything everywhere. And I chose a couple of emotional pictures to kind of express that. This is Oliver Twist, of course, and Please, Sir, I Want Some More. And Ron mentioned the transition of the city council in Santa Ana. I love to throw in the story that the mayor pro tem of the city of Garden Grove, also in Orange County, is a 26-year-old Vietnamese Latina who ran for the office of mayor while living in her car. And so when she comes into office, she brings with her a great deal of energy and influence and passion that's driven by her peers who are looking for a way to stay in the county they were born. This becomes a really interesting proposal. Sometimes people don't notice if they're not feeling the immediate pressure of not being able to afford housing and looking to, Boise or Bozeman or Vegas or Phoenix or Raleigh or wherever to move. I have begun to get anecdotal evidence of people who are roughly in my peer group who one of two things is happening. Their adult children are getting married and they're in their mid to late 20s and they're looking around at ownership opportunities. And unless they're in, tech wizards taking down giant salaries, they're also talking about moving. And suddenly my peers are going, well, where are my kids going? that's when becomes real for everybody. And Ron, to your point, the next thing that happens is, where are my folks going? My folks are moving to Boise, and there are baby chasers. There's going to be Grammy chasers too, happening eventually.
Yeah, good point.
So I want to take a shout out to the people who are doing LIHTC and other subsidized housing types, because they are so critical in terms of the overall food chain of housing, because the market cannot house extremely low income people. It just doesn't happen, right? We're working together, money goes out of one pocket and goes into another, and those folks go through an incredible amount of brain damage to assemble what they call the capital lasagna for offsetting the cost of these projects. And so I'm deeply grateful for all of them. The problem is, as wonderful as the paradigm is, it's only a drop in the bucket of what we actually need. If you look at just the numbers of subsidized affordable units that are coming online, it isn't anywhere near making a dent in what the overall demand is, especially when you look at the RENA numbers.
Hey, Daniel, for the audience, can you tell them what LIHTC is?
Oh, sorry. Yes, thanks, Ryan. That is the Low Income Housing Tax Credits. It's a government subsidy program, but it's based on the sales of tax credits. I won't get too wonky, but that's what that works. Thanks for that prompt. This is what we need. Again, Rochelle, we need more of everything everywhere. And so in an exploration of that, it's both the rezoning and redevelopment of properties to get denser things, but on a much smaller scale and a much more personalized level. There's things that can be done on existing properties and even on proposed new properties. And I want to talk through a couple of ideas that have to do with that. Oh, yes. Instead of getting this, we're getting this. And I just like the statistic that I think it's in 2020, California lost sufficient population, first time this has happened, to lose a seat in Congress. That's like a tectonic shift. That's massive, right? And it's just a really interesting phenomenon. The state of Florida, that's about a 0.5% population loss in California. In Florida, they gained 0.62% of their population. So I'm not sure there's a direct relationship between leaving California and moving to Orlando, but Disney just announced that 2,000 of their Imagineers, which are their more highly paid, i.e. not 80% of median income households, will be moving to Orlando because it's just too expensive to live. This is Disney from the infamous history of Orange County, or famous history. I love this picture as well. And this sort of, this is the LA version of what Ron showed. And you have that little Emerald City thing in the distance there, which is the downtown skyline, sandwiched between the mountains, and then miles and miles of what I like to call Bungalowville. Because there's tons and scads of properties, just like the ones Ron were showing in the north part of Orange County. And I like to say that the single most available resource for the production of attainable housing in the state of California is backyards. Backyards, particularly in these traditional grid organized communities where the sites used to be really big and they have a big backyard and a big front yard. And there are spaces in there that are being consumed with other homes. So I want to show you a couple of things that we worked on. The LA mayor had a design ideas competition, and there were 4 categories that they all proposed what I call gently denser solutions. These looked at existing single family properties and tweaked the law in order to write the design brief to get people to think creatively about how in future, we might be able to solve this problem on a smaller scale. This is a property, it's 50 by 150, it's in South Los Angeles. The premise here was we had an existing house on the main street, and then the idea was a long-term owner would be able to pull equity out of her house and develop this triplex in the back where members of her extended multifamily household could live, multi-generational and multifamily living in it. They're fairly simple. They're not great assuming units, but they're modest for people who are starting out and need rents that are just by their definition affordable. The homeowner would move into a ground level flat that's accessible and meets her needs. And then one of her adult children with children would move into the front house after it's remodeled. And you can kind of see what the density of that looks like on the left, the houses on either side are actually modeled on existing patterns. This, we're able to benefit from having an alley load as well as a street load in order to keep all the cars at the periphery of the site to the extent possible and stack the homes in order to create a very generous community space. Because if you're in small houses and in many sort of ethnic communities, many communities, family and community celebrations are really important. And in a complex like this, it's really nice to have a space where you can do that. And this is a typical Latina quinceañera celebration, and it has both many residents of the actual site and the community residents as well, because these communities are very typically populated by extended families who will live in multiple houses on the same block. There was another entry in the competition that took 2 sites of that same size. And on this one, we densified it even more with 10 units plus a community space. And the community space functions as a constantly changing space that can be used by anybody on the site in order to do those activities that are related to both the people who live there and the extended community. The axle on the right shows you, we put in I'm going to say catering truck parking space, because in the area of COVID, we got used to everything being delivered to us, including goods and services. And we thought that would be a great way to animate this community. It's on a corner. So the density of this increases significantly from what the underlying R1 zoning would allow. And just note the red text, as with the previous concept, these are not legal today. But the efforts here in the competition were to show, you know what, this feels kind of nice. And to make it feel comfortable, we worked with architectural forms that felt kind of new, but they felt familiar at the same time. So it doesn't, in order to insert something like this in an existing neighborhood, one of the ripple effects that we get to contend with is, does it look like it belongs to the neighborhood? Is it organic to that neighborhood? And there's a lot of effort to make sure that it is. That's what that pop-up space would look like. Exterior walls, this footprint is tiny. The exterior walls flip up in order to have indoor-outdoor relationship and get functionally more real estate for what's happening there. So those are pie in the sky, but the intention of the competition was to push policy that begins to really examine things like R1 zoning, and is it serving the needs of the changing culture? What we do have in California right now are ADU laws. So we also did a series of studies to look at, well, ADUs are great when we add them to existing homes. Point out, again, Los Angeles, we take a lot of lessons from there. In 2019, permits were issued for 4,000 ADUs in the city of Los Angeles. Now, it's still just kind of a drop in the bucket, really, but it's distributed. They're almost always organically affordable dwelling situations, and ordinary mom and pop people get to do that. Oh, thank you, John. And that's an accessory dwelling unit is what an ADU is. Thank you for that question. This was an example of a side-by-side. There are rules that govern this thing. There's a main house about 2,000 feet and an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, attached at 1,200 square feet. From the street, it looks like a one-family house, very, very typically oriented. However, the state law also allows you to have one built-in accessory, a junior accessory dwelling unit. So this is also a model study done on a 50 by 100 foot lot, so somewhat smaller than the competition, but a very common lot size throughout the areas being developed in Orange County and beyond. It's just about the most common at the moment. And so we looked at this and we came up with this, which essentially triples the density of households on an R1 property. This is legal today by state law in California. Again, it's 3 stories to get all of that onto the site. And in newer projects that are not governed by a super restrictive FAR, for example, you can do something like this, get up to the top, and there's a large roof deck that you can see populated in the image there. When you begin to combine all these different elements, the first one with the 2 homes, this one with 3, you begin to get a street view that looks like this, looks like very, very many larger single family neighborhoods. But this is sort of an aerial of that neighborhood. if you imagine that 50 by 100 foot lots tend to get 6 lots per acre, if we go to the simple duo, as we call it, a house plus a built-in ADU that doubles the density, if you go to some combination of triples and doubles, you can potentially get up to 18 units per acre in what looks like a conventional, wide open, single family neighborhood. So we talked about this. And one of the dilemmas of this is there's really difficult time finding property in Orange County that can be developed with a new small neighborhood of homes of this type. We are seeing them done in periphery places, including San Isidro and Corona and other communities that are just outside of Orange County. However, there may be places yet in the county where this could be done or on a smaller infill basis. Ron mentioned earlier that in addition to this, remember, more of everything everywhere, we need denser products as well. So on the rezonings, they're working with wrap projects and sometimes podium projects that create the density where it's needed and get a pop of a lot more units at one time. But I want to also just quickly discuss 2 other alternatives that in Orange County, if you remember the stats that Jeff gave at the top of the hour, there we have 10% of our population lives in poverty, right? So these are not designed to house those folks, but they're designed to house those folks who I said are in danger of moving out of the state imminently, the children of my peers. And so these projects, one of them is co-living. You've seen that before. It feels a lot like a dorm. It's a small living suite and a shared common area for residents. We're seeing that more of them done in Los Angeles. And again, lots of things get exported south of the Orange Curtain. And this is one that could work here with our universities and other things. This is a great stopping point for people just leaving university. And the other side of that coin is micro lofts. And there's a developer out of Seattle doing those in Los Angeles on transit stops, and they have 0 parking spaces because people transitioning often out of university life into the beginning of professional life are hard pressed to find a place to live and also afford the $600 to $800 a month it takes to operate a car. And then I just want to end on one thought and hopefully prompt some questions, and maybe Ron and I can get into a little bit, is I sort of like this slide because we see this happening. Go all the way back to Oliver Twist at the beginning. It's like the outcry to provide housing for people who need it the most is building momentum. And the problem is, how do we actually politically make it feasible in the county? And I'm not going to propose a solution to that, but it takes a lot of education and a lot of advocacy. I will tell you that I'm wearing my propaganda shirt today because it's something that I believe in. When you look at some of the things that restrict us from producing denser housing, and I listed a few of them there on the bottom. And we have to grapple with this together. All of us need to become housing advocates in terms of how we can actually pave the way for more housing to be built in Orange County, particularly, and throughout the state. The RENA numbers for the entire state of California are 1.8 million. So the numbers are staggering. And all my colleagues in the profession and the development beyond us, we need to roll up our sleeves and really get focused on how to do this. So thank you for letting me soapbox for 60 seconds there, but I think that's what our future is going to look like.
Okay, Daniel, we do have some questions in the Q&A, and I noticed, I think, in the chat. So I'm just going to go ahead and read from the top. Does the denser planning utilize the same setbacks as single family development?
Oh, that's a great question. Ron, let me take a swipe at that one, and then you can shore me up. I know that in the state law for accessory dwelling units, you can do an up to 16-foot high detached accessory dwelling unit, maximum size 1,200 square feet with a 4-foot backyard setback. And so that's one instance in which state law trumps any local ordinance, and it gives that you're able to do that by right. And I just want to throw this in, Ron, and I'll have you take a spin at that, is I want to say brace yourselves for a brave new world, because if your local municipality doesn't meet their RHNA numbers, Regional Housing Needs Assessment, by getting their housing element updated and approved by the Housing and Community Development Department in California by October 15th, kids, that's 90 days away. Then I'm going to say there's going to be a bloodbath, because the state can do some rather draconian things to override local control when someone is proposing a housing project. One wishes we didn't have to come to that sort of tension, but that's what's built into the current Regional Housing Needs Assessment.
And it's a very good question. And in new housing, you know, in traditional housing, there were 5-foot side yards. I'm finding in many new developments that's old news, and we're seeing 4-foot side yards and 3-foot side yards. Often the side yards are governed by the building code rather than the planning code. But it's something that is evolving and has been negotiated with each new development.
Ron, there's another thing that we're doing the same, similar types of products, right? But the idea of people growing progressively accustomed to living a bit closer, to having a little bit less open space with turf on it and things like that, is being really propelled by late scale millennials who are trying to buy now and stay in the county, because they're going, okay, boom, they still want their house, individual house, 4 sides on it with a puppy yard and maybe a roof deck. And so we're seeing a product that is called Detached Townhomes, which is 3-story, very tall homes, sometimes as close as 4 feet from each other. And it becomes sort of an approximation of a 0 lot line, and yet returns to the buyer a autonomous dwelling with 4 real walls.
You know, it's interesting because all of us dream of going on vacation to Paris or to Santorini or Mykonos, where spaces are tight, and it seems like that's an enjoyable experience. And yet when we come home, we want all this space that we can't really afford. So I think there's clearly a mindset that is changing, that is adapting to more urbanized, you know, conditions. It's either accept that or move to beyond Riverside and contend with the traffic. And at the same time, I have to say that as spaces get smaller and side yards and rear yards get smaller, I think we have a sense in the West of open space and private open space. So whatever patio and yard that we do have, we have to plan very efficiently and have it make sense, and have these big sliding doors so that our smaller yard can be incorporated with our living space, and it's more of an indoor-outdoor relationship. And that's what's unique about living in Southern California, where the weather is pretty nice all year round. And then couple that with having nice parks and open space that you can go to, even though you have less of your own. That's part of your environment. So you know, we have to work at driving the cost of housing down, but maybe some of that could be offset by more communal spaces.
Okay, this is a real interesting question. It actually plays in, Daniel and Ron, with conversations the three of us have had over the last month. And it gets into the fact that many of the types presented are exempt project types, not requiring involvement of an architect. I'm going to expand on that a little bit. Building low-income housing when you have a high price of land, how do we make sure we still get very good design?
Woof. I'll go first on that one too, Ron. I think one of the most fundamental things we have the opportunity to do as we embrace this challenge and try to think outside of our perhaps accepted and long-running mindset is, Jeff, I think we need to redefine what's beautiful. And there is a tendency that happens when I'm also working right now in a lot of what they call market rate attainable housing. And a market rate attainable housing is like the Spirit Air. Sorry if anybody of you had booked on Spirit Air yesterday. But it's the Spirit Airlines of housing, which is I give you just what you need and nothing that you don't. And because there are many people who cannot pay for things that they don't absolutely need as part of their life in order to get a modest, comfortable, decent shelter over their head, right? So in order to do that and manage construction costs, particularly in California and coastal areas, is we need to produce things that are simple, modest, and brace yourselves, repetitive, because the more similar things can be, the less expensive they are to actually construct. And I would urge all of us to re-examine our internal compass that defines what a home needs to do, in relationship to what it costs, and whether it makes it prohibitive for a person earning 60-80% of AMI to live in it. And that's a challenge for many architects. But I'm thinking there's a difference between simple and ugly. And I think that that's why an architect gets involved in these things. And you give me a kit of parts, some of the market-driven attainable project we're working on, my kit of parts is color, railings, color and railings. And so you do the absolute best you can do within those details. And I do think that an architect has a much better preparation to take those simple ingredients and put them into something that's memorable and appreciated than someone who doesn't.
We do a lot of affordable housing for all the major affordable housing developers. And I would say that there's still a very big interest in quality design among those companies. Like I showed, Related's Luxera project won a bunch of awards. But when, like, years and years ago, we did a project in Irvine, across the street from the city hall, when I was with McLaren Vasquez and partners, called Sao Paulo Apartments. And at the time, it was one of the first affordable housing projects, and people were all concerned, like, oh, those people are going to live there. And in fact, those people were firemen and school teachers and stuff like that. And when you drive through the neighborhood today, you can't tell. It looks like every other project. And there's a lot of examples where the affordable housing looks just as good or maybe even better than the next door market rate housing. So I don't think there should be this consideration that affordable housing has to look bad.
So Ron, yes, I completely agree with you, right? And I want to give another illustration. It reminds me of your slide that showed the contrast between South Orange County and North Orange County, right? Is you have to ask yourself, with the population we have, the people who are not leaving, and they're severely housing burdened, how do they solve that problem? And you showed it with the slide about the density, population density in Santa Ana. The way many people solve that problem is moving multiple households into one single family home. And you know them, you know what you've seen that, and it's the homes that have 7 cars parked in the front yard. And there's just a lot of people living there. And you know what? I think, I'll just speak for myself. I have to constantly check that I'm not somehow living in judgment on the people who have made that choice as a practical accommodation to stay in the place where they were born, to stay with their extended family, and to continue to enjoy the lifestyle that we offer. So I think we need more housing in order to allow families to move out of those multi-household arrangements in properties that were not designed for multiple households.
Yeah. You know, a few years ago, there was a seminar at the Disney Grand California Hotel that focused on affordable housing. And it came, not with my involvement, but it came up one of my projects called Oceana in Huntington Beach. And somebody was explaining that during the entitlement process, people were worried about those people, and it's going to increase crime, and it's going to, create more need for police and fire. And the former mayor of Huntington Beach rose up and he spoke, and he said that, that project has now been occupied for 3 years, and in 3 years there has not been a single incident that needed any kind of attention from police or fire. And so these people are truly thankful that they have a great place to live that they can actually afford, and they're not going to do anything to screw it up.
Yeah, I agree with that, Ron. I just had yesterday, I got to go by and visit an affordable project. Granted, it's a little bit off the scale because it was out in Playa Vista near the airport in LA, where they aggregated all the affordable units and put them into one building. And I'm not sure, that building's been around for several years. And the upkeep is it's perfect. It looks really good. And sadly, it's adjacent or very close to condominium buildings that are managed by an HOA, and the condominium buildings are the ones that look run down and not the affordable building. So it's an irony that happens. You don't anticipate that, but I completely agree with you that they're professionally managed, and it's important to keep things at that high quality level.
Okay, next question. Any thoughts on converting the many commercial properties that are vacant and have for lease signs on them to residential, or a combination of the two?
Oh, I want to go on that one too. Is it SB 9, Ron? There's current,
Yes.
if any of you are watching the bills that try to work their way through the legislature, there is one that's trying to, I want to say, energize the efforts that some cities are making to meet their housing element, get their housing elements to meet RENA and get HCD approval. There's an overlay that you can attach to underutilized parking areas in commercially zoned properties that gives you a by right approval of a proposed multifamily a community. And I think it has an inclusionary requirement. I'm not absolutely certain on that. But like many other housing bills, it's tied up in committee, and they get tied up. Oh, thank you. Somebody corrected me. It's SB 10, not 9. And I would urge you, if you have the opportunity, to read a synopsis of that bill, because it has I like the streamlining qualities of it. But there's a tendency with the legislation as it first comes out to attach too many riders and requirements on the development itself, that the requirements that are added to a project do not make the bonus density or the ease of the streamline worth it. It's a testy thing. It's moving in the right direction. I want to give Scott Wiener a gold star and nominate him for governor, but you can see it's moving. Ideas are moving into the legislature, which is incredibly encouraging to how to get it done. But that would address the issue that the person asked about.
Well, I have two thoughts on the person's questions. The one is, I think maybe it was repurposing the actual building into housing. And in some cases that may make sense. Like if it's a existing older high-rise building, or a lot of the old historic buildings in downtown Los Angeles being repurposed into housing, because you have a substantial building there, and to demo that building and build a new building may cause more environmental concerns and so on. But if you have major stock that could be repurposed, that may make sense. But if it's just like an old shopping center, it's probably more logical to clear it and do something more efficient. So that's that. And then I'm working on the Project Home Key conversions of motels to permanent supportive housing. And I think it's a great idea, but it's not just that easy. There's a lot of hurdles that have to be jumped through, but I think it's a good solution.
Okay, and my apologies to everybody. We have 12 more questions and time for probably one. So I'm using the ones that have the thumbs up. That's where I'm starting in the Q&A. So this is great, but how do we finance these projects and make them attainable and affordable for everyone? Public-private partnerships, other mechanisms. I'm getting emails about affordable housing listings above $700,000, which is not at all affordable. And I know there was a conversation about, I'm going to call it 68 homes for $425,000, and 4,000 people applied for it. How did they get it to the price of $425,000?
So it's my habit to go first, I guess. Just a couple quick things on that. The financing elements of this is very tricky. In the competition entry that we presented, it was based on the idea that a lender would have a community-based social impact program that would come in and empower that homeowner to pull the equity out of her house at 92 to do a development in the backyard. The 68 houses that you're mentioning with the 4,000 people on the waiting list, that's in Irvine, and I believe that's a community land trust. situation in Irvine, that people buy in, and then their harvest of their equity is limited if they sell and move on. So that model is kind of quirky. We didn't even get into the wealth generation aspect of being able for people to be in housing, but there's a lot of discussion of trusts, family trusts I mentioned, or land trusts in order to do that. But
and the Irvine company donated the land.
That helped a great deal too, right? So that's a P3 by anybody's estimation, but it had some creative financing, creative ownership. And I believe if you haven't heard yet the term social impact investing, you will soon, because there are big companies and big capital sources who are moving into a position of being more enthusiastic about doing well by doing good.
Well said.
So we are at just right after 1 o'clock. Again, a lot more questions here. But we are at the end of our time. So Hillary, what would you like to do next?
Hi everyone. We can actually have Daniel and Ron answer the questions that we have left in the queue, and we'll share those responses in our follow-up email. And for all of those that have attended today, AIA California will be submitting you for your AIA learning units following today's session.
All right, excellent. Daniel and Ron, how much time do you guys have?
I'm available.
Okay.
It starts to get a little tight for me at about 10 after.
Okay. So I'm just going to read from the top down. If California is losing population, then why do we need 1.8 million housing units?
Well, that's an interesting topic, because even the whole notion of that more people are moving out of state than moving in is controversial. That there's other reports talking about the tremendous job growth that's occurring here, and I forgot which one. General Motors, I think, is opening a new design studio in Southern California. So Southern California still is an attractor of jobs, and still an important, it's the most important economic center of America. And while some people are moving out of state, we have this huge population that still is growing from births. Another topic is that during the COVID period, there has been just a stop to foreign migration into America. But once that eases, it's expected that foreign migration is going to continue as it has been. So those are big economic generators and big rationale for housing. Plus, on top of it all, historically, we have been underhoused for decades. And so we need to build thousands of units just to keep up with demand every year.
Yeah, Ron, yes, I completely agree with that. And I just want to, put the cherry on the cupcake, which is I referenced earlier, people get housing arrangements that are based on necessity in order to deal with their issue of being severely housing stressed, right? The number of households who are in that condition, just look at the people who are severely housing stressed, spending more than 50% of their income on housing. We need houses for those people. And it may feel a little bit counterintuitive to the marketplace because, high rents return good returns to investors and to developers, and those things are good. But for the market itself and for people in housing need, we need more supply. It's supply and demand. It's classic economics. So to answer the question is the volume of people moving out is not anywhere approaching the volume of people who are housing stressed.
All right, I'm going to combine two questions here. I think this is going to work. So both of you do great affordable housing. You do great median price housing, and that housing that's the other 30% of the zip codes in Orange County, which is $1 million plus. Also, one thing we want to mix in then is what are your thoughts in combining low income subsidized? We're talking Orange County now, not downtown LA. So low income subsidized homeless in standard homes in new housing developments. And how do we do that?
We resurrect Hope 6 for starters. Sorry, I just threw out that for fun. I do think that mixed income can work It has to be very thoughtfully designed. And this is probably the bigger issue, the running through the gauntlet of community engagement that might lead to a project approval. Ron, I know you've seen this as the people that we've worked for to do affordable housing, the things the neighbors come out and say about those developers and about those people. And it's like, I think there's room for, I want to say, a maturing of our outlook toward other people who are less fortunate than us.
Well, the project I mentioned in Huntington Beach, Oceana Apartments, it was interesting because we had to go and meet with the neighbors during the entitlement period. And Huntington Beach is a very vocal community. And we met with the neighbors and they were only a little bit mean to us. I've heard much worse stories on other projects, but they were a little bit mean. And we ended up reducing the project because of that community input. But at the end of that meeting with the moderately mean people, one of the ladies came up to me and whispered, "How can I get my daughter on the waiting list?"
Yeah.
They need it too.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, infrastructure is a big issue, certainly in LA and Orange County. How can you take an R1 lot and create a 4 to 8 unit project without impacting water, sewer, traffic, air quality, and other city services?
These are the examples you were giving, Daniel. And by the way, before you answer that too, about the micro unit discussion, one of the real impacts there is parking. It's very difficult to achieve in Orange County with parking.
I agree, and it makes me sad because maybe when the trolley arrives in Santa Ana, some of that will be able to be factored in. But yeah, the lack of transit really makes the parking a very big challenge. I completely agree with that. Jeff, refresh what was the question again?
It has to do with infrastructure.
Okay, yeah. So it's a really great question. And certainly we were talking earlier about pre-war neighborhoods, and the pre-war neighborhoods tend to have little house footprints on big lots with big backyards, big front yards. And then there is some cumulative impact on the neighborhood that will eventually impact the infrastructure somewhere down the line is typically what happens. But most of the city systems in, I don't know, subdivisions in the last 50 years typically have adequate capacity to add a couple more residents on an R1 site. If we were going to do swaths of hundreds of them at once, I think it would present a bigger issue. It's a little bit harder to grapple with the emergency services, policing, et cetera, because yes, more people creates more demand. And I'm thinking, well, being the guy who's arguing for market rate attainable and mom and pop style solutions here, I think that if we would distribute where tax dollars go, it may be that we need to put more in the people who provide services than in the actual underwriting the cost of the home. Just a thought. And I know it's controversial, but just a thought.
So here's another one. I'm going to combine two questions into one. It has to do with density. An ADU and a junior ADU do not by state law add zoning density, just as adding bedrooms to a house do not add density. How are you referring to density, the population per square mile?
That's a great question. When I say gently denser future, sure. It's when I introduce multiple dwellings on a single lot for additional households in the ideal situation is a multi-generational extended family. That's my absolute favorite solution of that. But sure, if it's households, let's say households per acre, right? If households per acre, the ADU and junior ADU solution really bumps that number up without having the appearance of tiny homes on tiny lots really close together. Not that that's bad. I love Novell and I love other parts of Orange and LA County that do that because that's the new paradigm for sure. But I think that sorry, lost my train.
Okay, Daniel, do you have time for any more?
You got a really good one? Well, not that these weren't good. These have been great questions. They're very challenging and takes me right to the borderline of being from provocative crossing into controversial. So I know you're working that, Jeff. So let's see what we can do.
Okay, so here's one. I appreciate you sharing the multifamily situation, but by suggesting designing more appropriately for multifamily seems to ignore the cultural aspects of taking care of kids and elders on site and the issues of generational wealth and maintaining ownerships. Any thoughts?
Are you game for that one, Ron?
Well, I think to use your example of multiple houses on a lot, because I can see, grandma building these accessory units, and then she might move into one of the accessories, and the main house becomes her daughter's house with several children. And so I think that's an important thing. Another topic in Orange County is we have a lot of families from Persia and from China that have aging parents or parents-in-law that are with them. So these sort of ADUs or lock-off suites are a really important part of the marketplace here in Orange County. I don't know what else, just that, still we need to provide housing on the affordable end so that the young folks can occupy that, and also the old folks, because we need to think about the entire spectrum of the population.
Sure. And, I want to speak to the question as specifically sort of a cultural issue. It was about children and seniors and caring for them and so on. And one of the things that we got very excited about in both of the competition entries that I showed you was we know how these extended families work. It's on a family compound like that, where I have 4 households. Absolutely, Awella is staying home and she's able to watch the children when somebody goes to work. So there's a cost benefit relationship to that. And the people provide things and they share them with each other. In compounding folks, especially if they are related like that, in an environment like that, can actually be better for the environment than spreading them all out in less dense housing. I like that in the Latina example, we designed in edible landscape, which don't know if you know this, but if there are several important staples in some Latino diets that are also xeriscape or very, very low water use, like nopales, right? So if you're growing cactus and prickly pear, that's part of your diet together with other things on your site. All of that is functionally sustainable behavior, even within a denser family compound.
And another side note on this is the co-living experience. When we think about co-living, mostly we're thinking about young people recently out of college, living in a dorm-like environment. But I've been talking to some senior researchers, and we're thinking that this is a very good model also for senior living, because seniors tend, in a big complex, they tend to become isolated and insular, and it's such an institutional thing. But if they could live in smaller aggregations, like 4 to 8 occupants per unit, it's more like a family scale, and it's a different paradigm. And I think we're going to look at that in the future as well.
Well, and there's a tagline to that, which is that if you have a community where there's eds and meds, right? You have major educational institutions and maybe a major medical. I live in the city of Orange, and there's that zone in Orange that you have Chapman University, and then not that far away you have Chalk Hospital and all of its satellites. And in those instances, you tend to attract both children and seniors. And it turns out that there is a fairly large chunk of the mature population that wants to live close to younger people because it helps them feel, it makes them feel alive and to stay engaged and say, dang it, I'm not going to dress like an old person. I'm going to hang around with these young guys and gals and see, and just because I feel younger and I refuse to act my age. So we're seeing some of that as well. And especially micros, you get micros are the vast population there is just about what you'd expect, people in their late 20s, early 30s. And then every now and then you get like a 60-year-old, this is not me, but a 60-year-old divorced guy who just wants to go where the action is. And those folks need housing too. And he's just split his income, taking care of 2 households. So he needs something that costs less. The demographics are all over the map, and you just don't limit your imagination.
This might be more for Ron because you have been our statistics guy throughout this whole process, pulling together info. Any statistics on current preferences to own or to rent? What are you two looking at for the future? What's on the boards right now? Where's Orange County at?
Well, I think the aspiration is to own. That's, you know, what young people are dreaming of. But the reality is, it's just so hard to put together a giant down payment. And if home prices are escalating at $15 an hour, it's becoming farther and farther out of the reach. So I think rentals are a very important component of the housing picture. One thing we haven't talked about is, or maybe Daniel mentioned it, but the build for rent kind of sector. And so in many parts of the country, build for rent is really important, a huge sector where you're building a single family house, but people are going to live there for a short period of time or a long period of time, and they're going to rent. But the economics in Orange County and the economics in Southern California with these incredible land values push it out of the picture. We're looking at some of these sort of projects in the Central Valley and in Beaumont, places like that, Phoenix, but not realistic for Orange County.
No, agreed. And it's a part of the irony of the situation, because you just have to get where the dirt can support having lots of little one-story houses. Sorry, and I won't add that on there.
Okay, we got one question left here. The majority of housing development does not always take into account aging in place. How do you design affordable but flexible housing?
So I'm going to refer back to that fourplex again. And in that particular case, because the units are smaller and kind of modest, they are what I naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAA. And in those situations, and granted, that's small scale stuff, I think it's much harder to do that to scale. But just a quick reference point for y'all is, generally speaking, in the United States, about 65 to 70% of all households live in single family detached homes. That leaves you about 35% of everybody else who lives in a rental situation, particularly in something that's more than a duplex. So that just gives you the numbers that you're starting out with for perspective. In is it Southern California or Los Angeles? I'm not sure, but the percentage of owner-occupied single-family dwellings in Los Angeles County is 54%. So it's considerably off the national norm, even. So these are the economic, the financial issues are really critical to the conversation. And I think a lot of times as designers, we're not so jazzed about getting into that. But Ron, you know, every one of these conversations, you talk about BTR and whether you can do it in Merced or Clovis or wherever. You know, you can do it in Phoenix. You know, you can do it in parts of Colorado, right? And guess what? So we're exporting people to live in those things. So it's something we just need to keep asking ourselves these really difficult questions and not be afraid of challenging conversations in order to come up with solutions.
Well, also it's people have to get realistic as to square footage and what they really need. And I tell people to go to the IKEA store here in Costa Mesa, where they have model homes of 250 square feet and 450 square foot 2-bedroom model home. And you walk through and it's like, you know, it's got a full-size refrigerator, it's got a regular size bathroom, and you know, do you really need all this space? They seem to have everything you need, and they have creative storage solutions, which is what they sell at IKEA.
All right, I'm looking at the chat line. I'll go ahead and ask this. You know, Daniel, if you need to go, it's perfectly fine. Let's see, don't you agree that getting a project approved with many overlapping state and local codes and agencies has a great pressure of the cost of all housing?
Yes.
For sure, no doubt.
And there's a quick point on that, because I'm the one, I'm kind of delving into the philosophical things. Just heard a story about why in America, infrastructure is so extraordinarily costly when compared to our peer countries. And the point of this story on NPR, right? So was that the agencies feel a compulsion to mollify everyone who has a negative opinion toward what's being proposed. And that takes time and a lot of effort And time and effort, what does that equal? That's expense. And so the same thing happens in producing housing. What slows down and makes infrastructure so expensive also slows down and makes expensive the production of the housing we so desperately need. So great question by whoever asked it. And yes, you're absolutely on the money.
And there's a lot of excellent comments in the chat line. People really enjoyed this program. That's fantastic. I can tell you, we spent a lot of time putting this together. We wanted it to be engaging and thoughtful. This has been months of work, so thank you. The final question, though, is for Hillary. How will the recording be available?
Hi, everyone. Again, the recording will be available on the AIA California website, and I will be including a link to it in the follow-up email within the next couple days.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful comments. I really appreciate that.
No, love the feedback in the Q&A. Absolutely. And now I absolutely must dash. So
Okay.
thanks, you guys. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.